The Ukrainians, although they've got a small navy, don't have to enforce a blockade by ships or mines. They can enforce it by the threat of using aerial drones or sea drones. What we've seen really over the last week is an escalation of the deep battle from both the Russian and the Ukrainian perspective. And what we mean by the deep battle here is that both are going after each other's either combat potential assets or logistic assets, which sustain them in the close battle, that is the fighting going on in the Donbass or Zaporizhzhia. So what we've seen from the Ukrainian side is that they've disabled both the SIG, an oil tanker, and the Olenegorsky Gornyak, a landing ship. Now, both of those were used to resupply either southern Zaporizhzhia, the ports there, or Crimea. The SIG with oil, petrol, and lubricants, and the landing craft was used really as a ferry. And the reason for that is because of the limit capacity on the Kerch Bridge. So if you can degrade the amount of equipment which the Russians can get into their combat forces, you caveat their combat potential. So that is why they've been doing that. What is more important, though, is that certainly in the SIG, it was attacked in what would legitimately be Ukrainian waters. Now, if it is occupied, Russia would say that is their waters. That cannot be allowed to stand. Even more intriguing, in a sense, is that the Ukrainians have said that they will hold Russian ports on the Black Sea at risk. That is Anapa, Sochi, Novorossiysk, Gelendzhak, and Taman. What that means is that 50% of the Russian shipping goes through those Black Sea ports. So if the Ukrainians have said that they will hold them at risk, that is that they may attack merchant shipping, which is shipping stores for the Russians, there are potential impacts on the Russian economy because the Ukrainians, although they've got a small navy, don't have to enforce a blockade by ships or mines. They can enforce it in a way by the threat of using aerial drones or sea drones. All that really means that it diverts Russian assets away from the fight to potentially escort merchant shipping, and reduces probably the amount of shipping which is available to the Russians, because certain countries will not go in that environment if they're non-Russian flagged or owned. And also the war insurance premiums for any ships go up, and that also has the potential to degrade the Russian economy. On the Russian side, what they have been doing is try to hit, particularly with the very large 70 missiles attack on Staro-Konstantinov airfield, the assets which the Ukrainians have used for their deep attacks, principally both the British Storm Shadow and the French Scalp. Essentially, that is the same missile. It was a collaborative venture because it is really from that airfield that a lot of the missiles are launched via the former Su-24, former Russian aircraft. And it is essentially an air-launched cruise missile. So it is in the Russians' interest to go and try and attack and destroy that airfield, in the same way that the Ukrainians have also tried to attack Berdyansk airfield, which is where a lot of the Russian helicopters are being used to come forward to try and take the close battle fight to the Ukrainians in Zaporizhzhia. So airfields are very difficult to destroy. We don't know what the battle damage assessment has been on the attack on the Ukrainian airfield from which they're launching the Storm Shadow and Scalp, but there is a certain logic to what both sides are doing. One of the things that is evident from a survey of 2,000 conflicts is that the likelihood of a ceasefire is greatest earliest in a conflict, but it then decreases and diminishes to its lowest point after 2 years. Now, the combat potential of both sides at the moment is such that the notion of there being either a truce, a ceasefire, an armistice, or a peace settlement, because there is a linear progression potentially along that line, is still extremely low at the moment. So all that the Jeddah conference, the so-called Saudi Arabian peace talks were doing at the moment, was really setting the framework for what might be acceptable in terms of both international law, sovereignty, and territorial integrity from a Western leaning perspective, because, of course, even though China was at the Saudi so-called peace talks, Russia was not. And Russia still takes the view that the new reality is that the four oblasts of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, along with Crimea from 2014, are part of that new reality and are Russian territories from their perspective. It is that dynamic which has really frozen any attempt to go towards any peace talks of any meaningful manner since that occurred in September 22.